Hi friends, welcome back to 5 Minute Modern, where in 5 minutes or less we learn about an important artist, artwork, or concept in the history of modern art. My name is Cindy, and today we're taking a look at the boldly expressionistic work of artist Fritz Scholder. He would come to be recognized as one of the most important indigenous artists of the century. Ironically, that was largely because he broke with so many of the traditions surrounding indigenous art. Born in 1937 in Minnesota, Scholder's mother was of English and Irish descent, and his father was of French, German, and Luiseno ancestry. Scholder's father worked for the Bureau of Indian Affairs, which meant that Scholder moved often as a child. And that actually allowed him to learn from diverse artists, such as the Sioux painter Oscar Howe, who introduced Scholder to modern painting styles. Scholder continued his education when the family moved to Sacramento, and he studied under Wayne Thiebaud and Gregory Condos, whose colorist styles would have a major influence on him as well. In spite of the influence of Oscar Howe, as well as his own indigenous ancestry, Scholder didn't think of himself as an indigenous painter. But in the summer of 1961, he received a scholarship to the Southwest Indian Art Project hosted by the University of Arizona at Tucson. While there, Scholder and his fellow artists discussed whether indigenous artists should feel obligated to work in a certain style, and they all emphatically agreed that no, of course any artist should work in whatever style they chose. Scholder didn't want to be limited by stereotypes of indigenous people. Traditional indigenous styles of art clearly held little appeal for him, at least in terms of influencing his own work. Rather, Scholder would look to Europe for stylistic inspiration. The critic Edward Lucie-Smith recalled that Scholder was deeply influenced by the Norwegian painter Edvard Munch, who was largely responsible for originating the expressionist style. In expressionist art, artists selected bold colors and distorted forms to correspond to their strong emotions about a scene, rather than seeking a strictly accurate representation. The resulting compositions can look messy, but also bracingly impactful. Scholder noted that he applied colors automatically, using oil paint when he felt calm, or faster drying acrylic paint if he was feeling impatient. And I think the way he integrated impulsiveness into his process aligns well with the impetuous and impassioned nature of expressionist work. However, I think it's important to note that while he did draw inspiration from Europe, Scholder would go on to develop his own unique style of expressionism. Consider the backgrounds of many of Scholder's portraits, which are often only one or two colors, though both applied in a rich and vibrant tone. I see a sort of directness in the limited color palette, which mirrors the straight shooter style of talking in the Southwest, where Scholder spent his adulthood. There's also a clarity of feeling well suited to Scholder's subject matter. Unlike the existential angst at play in the work of European expressionists, Scholder's work was preoccupied with the painfully tangible history of indigenous people in America. As Scholder was rising to prominence in the late 1960s and 1970s, a new wave of indigenous activists was also coming to the fore. The American Indian Movement, or AIM, would be founded in Minneapolis in 1968 to campaign for the civil rights of indigenous Americans and to address the lasting wounds of the colonial violence that had nearly decimated America's indigenous population. This devastating history would be rendered in an especially poignant manner in Scholder's work due to his highly charged style. Let's look at Scholder's 1968 painting, Dying Indian. The colors are patchy and multi-layered, making the body look mangled, with long streaks of red paint dripping down like blood. Or consider Massacre in America, Wounded Knee, a grisly evocation of the 1890 massacre in which U.S. soldiers murdered over 300 members of the Sioux tribe. In the foreground, Scholder paints a wagon, which looks almost like a grave dug into the ground. The bodies of the dead are rendered as a mass of thickly smeared pink and red streaks, all piled together, and a lone horse stands in the distant background beyond a vast, empty landscape. They're two truly haunting paintings, and I think they both speak to the inhumanity of the treatment of indigenous people in this country. The vibrant colors and distorted forms bring us closer to how horrific these events must have felt, even as they distance us from how they must have really looked. These paintings feel as raw and present as an exposed nerve, even though they reference events that happened over a century ago. I think it's really amazing how Scholder was able to speak to lasting wounds in the indigenous community, drawing on his own ancestry and portraying the events with such immediacy of feeling. In working on this video, I actually drew a bit on my own ancestry as well. My grandmother was deeply interested in the work of indigenous and Western artists like Scholder, and she and I had many deeply enriching conversations about their work. Although she sadly passed away a few years ago, my grandmother's love of the arts continues to inspire me and the work I do on this channel. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Please remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.